The last thing I really want to talk about along these same lines is a lot of right-wing libertarians, and I imagine some left-wing libertarians too, are very critical of central banks and of the Federal Reserve. From what I've heard of you speak on the subject, you seem supportive of the Federal Reserve, saying that we need it in the kind of system that we're in. I'm just curious if you can tell me why it's a good thing that a banking cartel, whether it's public or private, however you want to consider it, why they should have a monopoly on capital.
I don't say they should, but you had a qualification there. In the world in which we're in, right? In the world in which we're in, we have two choices. We could eliminate the Federal Reserve and just let the banks do anything they feel like, and avoid and eliminate any possibility for dealing with things like financial crises and recessions. We could do that if we like, or we could use the mechanisms that exist. You can't say, gee, it would be nice if we had another world in which these things didn't happen, but we have this world, right?
Well, there are examples that, for even in Massachusetts, there's something called Berkshires, which is a local community creating their own currency, and which is, I think, a form of organization. So, I mean, wouldn't that be a good thing if local communities create?
Local communities can do all kinds of things. In fact, many good things happen locally, much more important than that, in my opinion. So take the spread of worker-owned enterprises in the old Rust Belt, particularly. Could happen here, too. The development of cooperatives. These are very important developments. They build the seeds of what could be a better future society. But that's certainly worth doing. But that does not change the fact that we have major decisions to make. When the financial institutions, when a housing bubble is created by largely predatory activities of the major financial institutions, and it bursts, and it leads to a financial crisis, we have a couple of choices. We could say, okay, let's all starve. Or we could say, let's use the mechanisms that are available, which happen to be the Federal Reserve and the government stimulus, to try to do something about them. Those happen to be the choices in this world.
Well, a lot of Austrian economists would say that it's actually central banks who cause bubbles because they artificially inflate the money supply.
Well, except that that's absolutely not what happened. So I don't care what they say. What happened, we know what happened, and it's different.
Okay. I mean, do you think that it can cause a bubble if a central bank does inflate the money supply, either through credit or through currency?
It's conceivable, but just take a look at the inflation rate in the last, say, 10 years. There's constant predictions from the right that all of this is going to lead to inflation. In fact, it's not even reached the level that the Federal Reserve wants to hit. It's lower. I mean, you have to pay some attention to the facts of the world, not just live in some dream world.
Okay. So, I mean, I guess you would totally say that all Austrian economic... I'm kind of curious what you think of Murray Rothbard. I mean, I guess you kind of said these things where you think that this would lead to kind of a private monopoly.
Look,
do you think there's any...
Murray Rothbard's position was that the world that he was spelling out, first of all, it would self-destruct in a minute. But apart from that, it is a world in which is built on, I mean, let's be concrete. Suppose that there's a highway that I don't use, okay? Like there's plenty of roads in Boston I never use. According to Murray Rothbard, I shouldn't be paying taxes for those roads. I don't use them. Why should I pay taxes? If somebody wants a road, they can build it. And then suppose somebody else wants to use it. All right, they'll pay tolls, and on and on. Can you imagine a world like that? Apart from the fact that under his proposals, there's nothing to stop the concentration of private capital, which is exactly what's going to happen, enormous concentrations of private capital, which are unaccountable because we don't have the state mechanisms to deal with them. I mean, this is, in my view, I mean, you know, he did some good work. I mean, a lot of his historical work was kind of interesting. He had some interesting things to say about economics. But the prescriptions, I think, are just outlandish.
I guess for me, it's frustrating when you see that there are so many people who either call themselves socialists or call themselves capitalists or mutualists or whatever. And, you know, it seems like there are a lot of commonalities as far as reducing the relationship between money and power, the tie between these corporations and the state, you know, limiting the use of force that's unjustified. And it seems like
they could cooperate.
It seems like it could cooperate. And
I perfectly agree. I do it all the time. I mean, for years, after the collapse of the 1960s left journals like Ramparts and others, there was nowhere for me to publish. I was publishing in a right-wing libertarian journal for years. I had no objection to that. We agreed on a lot of things.
But you think it would lead to tyranny?
What?
But you're saying that you know, it would lead to tyranny if we were to embrace those philosophies.
Yes. But you know, I can also write. Say, if I write for the New York Times, doesn't mean I support their views of the world.
Mm.
But there are opportunities to cooperate, yes, and they should be used. I mean, plenty of basis for cooperation, like opposition to military intervention, opposition to the kind of state power that subsidizes and supports predatory and destructive corporate institutions, like take, say, the huge growth of financial institutions during the neoliberal period has been strongly fostered by state power. As you may know, there was an interesting IMF study a couple of years ago, International Monetary Fund, which investigated profits of top U.S. banks and found that it almost entirely comes from indirect taxpayer subsidies through, among other things, the implicit insurance policy. Sure, I oppose that. But that all doesn't mean that I'm in favor of eliminating Glass-Steagall. No, I'm not. So you have to make decisions. If you care about people and their fate, you have to make choices on the basis of what opportunities exist. Okay? So we can say, gee, I don't like state power, I'll get rid of welfare. No, that's not the right answer.
So besides welfare and besides financial regulations, are there any areas of the government that you do not want to cut?
Yeah, I'd like to have roads, for example. I'd like to have public schools. I'd like those to grow and develop. Many things.
Okay.
In fact, take what you're using over there, that computer.
Excuse me, Avi. It's 12:15.
Yeah, I'll leave them. I'll just finish. Take the equipment that you're using. Where do you think that came from? It came from the dynamic state sector of the economy, substantially. From places like right where you're sitting, in fact, under government funding. Okay, you'd like to have a world in which things work differently. How about this world?
Makes sense. Well, thank you very much, Professor. I do appreciate your time.